The day I handed my house to my son, he smiled, then looked into my eyes and said, "You're just a guest now." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. But what he saw the next morning shattered him in a way he never imagined. This is a story of a mother who gave everything, her time, her youth, her health, her dreams, and finally her home, to the son she loved more than her own heartbeat. She believed that love returns, that kindness circles back, and that children never forget the hands that raised them. But life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the people closest to us hurt us the most. Today's story begins with a moment of pure trust and ends with a morning that changed a family forever. It is a journey through betrayal, silence, heartbreak, and the quiet strength that only a mother carries in her soul. As you listen, you may see shadows of your own life, echoes of your own pain, or reflections of choices you once made. So sit with me, breathe deeply, and let this story unfold, because a single sentence broke a mother, but a single sunrise rewrote her destiny. 1. The signing day. One long paragraph exactly as you requested. The morning the papers were to be signed, I woke before the sun, my heart beating softly like an old clock that had learned to tick through storms. I moved slowly through the house I had lived in for 43 years, touching the edges of picture frames, the faded grooves in the hallway wall, the window where my husband once stood every evening to check if I was coming home safely, and as my fingers traced memories, I whispered to myself, "It's time." Even though nothing inside me truly felt ready. The kitchen smelled like old wooden cabinets and last night's tea, and as I poured myself a cup, my hands trembled, not because I feared giving the house to my son, Daniel, but because I feared the changes that come when ownership shifts, when the child becomes the one who holds the keys, when the roles quietly flip and parents become shadows in their own homes. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, and as I sat at the dining table, the same table where Daniel learned to read, where he cried after losing his first football match, where he blew candles every birthday until he turned 21, I wondered how a lifetime could fit inside a single document, a few signatures, a legal stamp. When they arrived, Daniel and his wife, Melissa, they didn't ring the bell, they let themselves in, as they always did, but something in their footsteps felt different, faster, sharper, as if their hurry held more excitement than sentiment. Melissa walked past me with a smile so bright it looked rehearsed, and Daniel kissed my head quickly, saying, "Mom, today's a big day, yeah?" And I nodded, even though my throat refused to form words. The lawyer, a thin man with square glasses and a voice too flat for such an emotional morning, placed the documents on the table, explaining everything in a tone that made the whole process feel like a business transaction instead of the handing over of a life's worth of love, sacrifice, and history. When he slid the final page toward me, the one with bold letters spelling transfer of ownership, I stared at it for a long moment. My name looked strange beside Daniel's, like two worlds pressed together with ink, and I thought of all the nights I stayed awake worrying about him, all the meals I cooked when we barely had money, all the times I saved myself from buying something I needed so he could get something he wanted. My hand shook as I picked up the pen, not because I doubted my decision, but because the moment felt heavier than my heart could carry. Still, I signed, slowly, carefully, writing every letter like a goodbye. Daniel signed next, quickly, confidently, almost eagerly, and Melissa clapped softly as if the house were a prize they had won rather than a legacy they had been entrusted with. The lawyer shook hands, gave polite congratulations, and left, and as the door closed behind him, a strange coldness settled into the room, the kind that creeps into a home not through open windows but through changing hearts. I expected Daniel to hug me, to say something emotional, something reassuring, maybe even something simple like, "Mom, nothing changes," but instead he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said with a playful smirk, "Well, looks like things will be a bit different now," and Melissa laughed, not kindly, but in a way that pinched my chest. I tried to smile, tried to be cheerful, tried to pretend this was just a moment of joking, but the tone in his voice carved a thin line of fear inside me, a fear that grew sharper when Daniel stood up, walked around the table, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said the sentence that would echo in my bones long after the sun had set, "Mom, you're just a guest now." He said it lightly, as if it wasn't meant to hurt, as if it were a harmless tease, but words have weight, and this one landed on my heart like a stone. Melissa didn't correct him, didn't soften the moment, didn't offer warmth, she just glanced at him with a satisfied smile, the kind people wear when something they wanted finally becomes theirs. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had moved closer, and my breath felt heavier, but I kept my composure. Mothers are built to swallow pain without letting it spill. I nodded gently, forcing a laugh, saying, "Well, every home needs a guest," even though inside I felt like the floor beneath me had cracked. After lunch, they began discussing changes they wanted to make, painting the living room, converting my sewing room into Melissa's workspace, throwing out old furniture that apparently didn't fit their aesthetic, and I watched, silently, as the home I nurtured slowly became a project for them to redesign. The air shifted. I wasn't asked what I thought, wasn't looked at for approval, wasn't even acknowledged beyond polite courtesy. I felt like a ghost walking through my own memories. Later that evening, when they left, I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed my husband and I once shared, and tears finally came, not loud sobs, but quiet, steady tears that carried years of motherhood in each drop. I cried for the version of Daniel I missed, the little boy who used to say, "Mom, don't ever leave me," the boy who once held my hand tightly while crossing the street, the boy whose eyes sparkled every time I clapped for him. I cried because love sometimes turns into distance without warning. I cried because I didn't know what tomorrow would bring now that the house wasn't mine. And as the moon rose outside my window, lighting the street with a soft silver glow, I whispered to my husband, wherever he was, "I hope I did the right thing." I didn't sleep that night. I just lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe its old, familiar breaths, wondering if this was the last night it would feel like home. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, something in me shifted, a quiet strength, a voice inside whispering, "You are not a guest in your own life." And though I didn't know it then, the next morning would change everything. A guest in my own home. One long paragraph, as you requested. The morning after the papers were signed, the house felt unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves were waiting for me to realize that something irreversible had happened, and when I walked into the kitchen, the sunlight fell differently, harsh and sharp instead of warm and gentle, almost as if even the morning light was warning me that my position in this home had quietly changed overnight. I made tea, my hands still shaky from yesterday's words, and just as I sat down, I heard the front door open without a knock, Daniel and Melissa stepping in with the confidence of people walking into a place they owned, and although they had always entered freely, today the sound of their footsteps felt heavier, louder, as if reminding me that the house now responded to them more than it did to me. Melissa barely greeted me before she began scanning the living room with a critical eye, moving objects slightly out of place, lifting cushions, straightening curtains, and making soft comments like, "We'll fix this soon," and "This doesn't match our style," each sentence slicing a little deeper into my heart, because this was not a suggestion, it was a declaration of takeover. Daniel, meanwhile, approached me with exaggerated casualness, patting my shoulder and saying, "Mom, from now on, things will be more organized. We'll make some improvements," and I nodded, pretending to agree even though the word "we" excluded me more than it included me. They began opening cupboards, checking drawers, measuring walls for shelves and decorative units, speaking to each other as if they were architects planning a renovation, and I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller, quieter, almost invisible in the home I had once filled with my laughter, my tears, my voice, my memories. At one point, Melissa looked at a small wooden shelf my husband had built years before, his last handmade gift to me, and she said, "This old thing has to go, it ruins the modern look," and for a moment my breath caught in my throat, not because of the shelf but because of how easily a stranger could erase years of emotion with a single careless comment. I tried to explain, softly, "Your father made that, it's special," but Melissa responded with a smile that wasn't really a smile, saying, "I know, Mom, but let's not live in the past," and the way she said it made me feel like the past, my past, was a burden she wanted gone. Daniel didn't defend me, he just shrugged and said, "We'll decide later," and my heart twisted, because he was no longer the boy who once cried when I threw away his broken toy, he was now a man who didn't mind discarding pieces of my life. As the day went on, they kept suggesting where I should keep my things, my clothes, my books, even my sewing machine, and every suggestion felt less like guidance and more like restriction, like they were allocating me a corner in a house that once belonged entirely to me. At lunchtime, Melissa cooked without asking me what ingredients were where, as if my kitchen was now her territory, and I sat at the dining table silently, noticing how Daniel placed 2 plates near themselves and a third plate slightly farther away, unconsciously creating a distance that had never existed before. We ate in an atmosphere that felt staged, artificial, and when I tried to join their conversation, they gave polite nods but swiftly returned to their own discussions about paint colors, light fixtures, and future plans, and I realized I was no longer part of their vision, just an observer in a life I had helped build. After lunch, Melissa walked into my sewing room without permission, scanning it critically before saying, "This would be perfect for my office. My clients will love this space," and before I could respond, Daniel added, "Mom, you don't use this room much anyway, right?" And the gentle tone he used felt like a velvet-covered blade. I wanted to protest, wanted to remind them that this room held my memories, my work, my identity, but I swallowed the words, because mothers are taught to hold their pain quietly, to soften themselves so their children remain comfortable. And yet, behind my silence, something inside me was breaking, slowly, deeply, painfully. Evening came, they left, and I walked through the house room by room, noticing tiny shifts, Melissa's scarf hanging on the hallway chair, a new vase sitting where my husband's photo used to be, a faint scent of their perfume lingering in the living room, and I realized the transformation had already begun. I sat on the floor of my sewing room, touching the wooden table scratched by years of stitching and mending, and tears pooled in my eyes, not from anger but from the unbearable feeling of displacement. I wasn't thrown out, I wasn't insulted, I wasn't mistreated, not openly, but I was being gently pushed into the background, into a space where my presence was tolerated but not treasured. And though Daniel didn't say it again, the words he had spoken yesterday echoed in my mind, "You're just a guest now." I felt that truth settling around me like dust, silent and suffocating. But deep within that heaviness, a small spark of strength began to warm my chest, not loud, not rebellious, but firm, whispering that I still had choices, that my story wasn't ending here, that guests can leave, guests can change, guests can surprise. And just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fading gold, I stood up slowly and said to the empty room, "I will not let myself disappear." I didn't know how, but I knew this was only the beginning. The hidden letter. One long paragraph, as requested. The next morning, I woke with a heavy chest, the kind of heaviness that doesn't come from lack of sleep but from the weight of unspoken truths, and as I moved through the house, every creak of the floor, every shadow on the wall, every familiar corner felt unfamiliar, as if the home itself was grieving with me. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, dusting shelves, folding laundry, but the silence around me felt thick, almost suffocating, and it pushed me toward the old wooden cupboard in my bedroom, my late husband's cupboard, the one I had avoided opening for months because every time I touched its handle, memories rushed at me like a wave strong enough to drown. But something pulled me there today, something I couldn't explain, a soft whisper inside my heart telling me, look inside." I opened the cupboard slowly, allowing the scent of old clothes, dried rose petals, and the faintest trace of my husband's cologne to spill into the room, and for a moment I closed my eyes because the memories were too sharp, too warm, too painful. I began sorting through his belongings, his watch, his glasses, the shirt he wore on our last anniversary, and with each item, a piece of him returned to me, not in body but in presence. At the very bottom of the cupboard, under a stack of faded shawls, my fingers touched something stiff, a small brown envelope sealed with tape. The paper had yellowed around the edges, and my husband's handwriting, shaky yet familiar, stretched across the front, "For my wife. Only open when you feel alone." My breath caught. My heart stopped. I sat on the floor and held the envelope to my chest, feeling it tremble against me like a heartbeat from the past. With trembling fingers, I tore it open, and inside I found a letter, several pages long, written in ink that had slightly smudged, as if even the words had cried. I opened it carefully, and the moment my eyes fell on the first line, tears blurred my vision. "If you are reading this, it means you are carrying more burden than you deserve." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket in winter. He wrote about love, about how proud he was of the life we built, how he worried that after he was gone, I would be too soft, too trusting, especially with Daniel, who always had a tendency to be influenced easily by others. Then came the lines that made my hands go numb. "This house must always remain your safe place. I have placed legal protections. Even if you sign it away, it cannot be transferred without a secondary approval from you after my passing. No one, not even our son, can force you out or claim authority unless you willingly, freely consent a second time. I wanted you to always have a home. Please protect yourself." I froze. The room spun. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reread the lines over and over, each time feeling a different wave of shock. The house wasn't fully transferred. My husband had set a hidden legal condition to protect me, one I never knew existed. The transfer Daniel celebrated yesterday was incomplete. It held no full power. Legally, I was still the primary owner. The realization hit me like a storm, not of anger, but of overwhelming love and grief. My husband had known. He had predicted something. He had prepared. I pressed the letter to my forehead, sobbing softly, the kind of crying that comes when pain meets relief. I whispered, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" But then I understood. He trusted that if he told me, I would argue, refuse, or feel insulted. So he protected me in silence, the way husbands of old generations often do, quietly, deeply, without asking for anything in return. Inside the envelope was also a small key with a tag, Drawer 3, Study Table. With unsteady legs, I walked to his study table, opened the drawer, and inside found a folder marked Property Safeguard Documents. The signatures, clauses, legal stamps, all confirming what the letter said. The house was still mine. Yesterday's signing had meant nothing unless I approved again, and I suddenly felt a strange mix of power and heartbreak swirl inside me. Part of me wanted to confront Daniel immediately, to tell him the truth, to watch the pride in his eyes shatter. But another part of me, the mother part, hesitated, wondering if hurting him would heal me or only create deeper wounds. As I sat there holding the documents, I felt a new strength, a quiet fire, begin to rise within me, not revenge, not anger, but self-respect, the kind that grows when you realize you were never as powerless as you thought. I whispered to the empty room, "You were right. I'm not alone." And though I didn't yet know how, I knew the letter had changed the direction of my life. A storm was coming, not loud or violent, but steady and righteous, and for the first time in days, I felt ready. Ready to stand. Ready to speak. Ready to reclaim what was mine. Not just the house, but my dignity, my place, my voice. The last dinner together. One long paragraph as requested. The day after discovering my husband's hidden letter, I moved through the house with a strange mix of calm and quiet determination, as if I were carrying a secret flame inside me that no one else could see. Every corner I passed, every photo I touched, every object I picked up felt different now, not because the house had changed, but because I had. Yesterday I was a guest, today I was the owner who had risen from her silence. Yet despite the strength flowing in my veins, I didn't reveal anything to Daniel or Melissa. Instead, I decided to watch, to observe, to allow them to show their true intentions before I made my move. That evening they called, saying they wanted to discuss some changes over dinner, and though my heart tightened at the thought of another day of their dismissive tones, I agreed, because something inside me whispered that this dinner might be the last one where I remained quiet. I cooked slowly, thoughtfully, preparing all of Daniel's childhood favorites, lentil soup, the way he used to love it when he came home from school, fried chicken seasoned exactly how he liked on rainy evenings, and the soft, warm bread he always asked me to keep extra because he loved dipping it into curry. As I cooked, memories floated around me like ghosts from a sweeter time, Daniel laughing with missing teeth, Daniel hugging me after nightmares, Daniel promising as a child, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll always take care of you." I wiped away tears with the back of my hand, reminding myself that memories are not shields, they are just reminders of what once was. When they arrived, Melissa walked in first, wearing a sharp expression that softened slightly at the smell of food, while Daniel smiled with a familiarity that felt almost like the son I once knew, and for a brief second, I wondered if the house could still bridge the distance between us. But the illusion broke quickly. As we sat at the table, the conversation shifted to their plans, knocking down the wall between the dining room and living room, replacing old-fashioned curtains, repainting every room, and then, almost casually, Melissa said, "We were thinking maybe you could move your things into the smaller bedroom at the back. It will be easier for you, and we'll use the main bedroom as our space when we move in next month." Her words were dipped in a tone of "I'm helping you," but the reality stung like betrayal. Before I could respond, Daniel nodded. "Mom, it's logical. You don't need so much space. And once everything is renovated, you'll feel more comfortable in a room that suits your age." The fork slipped from my hand, hitting the plate with a small metallic sound that seemed to echo louder than it should have. I looked at them, both sitting across from me with bright faces full of plans, and for the first time, I saw not children, not family, but people rearranging my life as if I were a piece of furniture they could shift around. I smiled softly, forcing my voice to stay steady, and said, "If that's what you think is best," even though inside, my heart whispered, "You have no idea what's coming." As dinner continued, they talked excitedly about future renovations, choosing colors, hiring electricians, replacing flooring, and all I did was listen, quietly, patiently, memorizing every smile, every tone, every careless assumption they made about my role in this home. But even as I listened, I stood up from the table multiple times under the excuse of refilling bowls, when in reality, I walked to the kitchen to breathe, to steady the storm rising within me. On my third trip back from the kitchen, I paused in the hallway, looking at them from a distance, and something inside me shifted again. This time it wasn't just strength, it was resolve. I realized this meal wasn't a family dinner. It was a farewell to an old version of me, to the mother who accepted everything quietly, to the woman who never questioned her place. When dessert came, I placed the bowl of warm rice pudding in front of Daniel, just like I used to when he was little, and he smiled, unaware of the battle happening behind my eyes. The rest of the dinner passed in forced politeness, and when they stood to leave, Daniel hugged me lightly, saying, "Mom, don't worry, everything will be perfect once we take full control of the house," and Melissa added with a rehearsed sweetness, "We're doing this for your comfort, really." I nodded, watching them leave, closing the door gently behind them, and once the lock clicked, I leaned against it and let out a long, shaky breath. The house felt too still, as if it too had held its breath during their visit. I walked to the dining table and sat down alone, running my fingers over the empty plates, the crumbs, the echo of voices that had filled the room moments earlier. Tonight, I had cooked a final dinner, not for them, but for the woman I had been up until now. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I would no longer sit silently. Tomorrow I would no longer be a guest. Tomorrow Daniel and Melissa would learn a truth that would shake the ground beneath them, and this dinner would be remembered as the quiet before the storm. Ooh, the morning shock. One long emotional paragraph. The next morning, I woke before the birds, before the sun even touched the curtains, with a strange stillness in my chest, part fear, part courage, part something new that felt like destiny unfolding, and as I walked through the silent house, the memories of last night sat heavy in my mind, every word Daniel and Melissa had said echoing softly like distant thunder warning of an approaching storm. I moved from room to room quietly, almost ceremonially, touching the furniture, the walls, the frames, knowing that after today, nothing would remain the same. With my husband's letter hidden safely in my blouse and the legal folder tucked under my shawl, I began preparing everything for the moment I knew was coming. I gathered the old family albums, the property documents, the spare keys, and quietly placed them in a small brown bag, one that Daniel had bought for me years ago when he was still gentle, still kind, still my little boy. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. I locked the door, not out of anger, but out of protection of myself, my memories, my rights, and slipped the key into the small pocket of my shawl. I took one final look at the home I had built brick by brick with my husband, one final breath of its warm scent, and then walked away, leaving behind a silence that would greet Daniel and Melissa like a slap across the face. Hours later, when they arrived, laughing, chatting, discussing paint samples, they pushed the door lightly, expecting it to swing open as always, but the clicking sound of the locked door made them freeze. Melissa frowned first, then rattled the handle aggressively, her voice sharp with irritation. "Why is the door locked?" Daniel pulled out his spare key, but when he inserted it, it wouldn't turn. Confusion flashed across his face. He tried again, harder, twisting it left and right, but the lock refused to move. "Mom never locks the door," he muttered, a hint of unease creeping into his tone. Melissa stepped back, hands on her hips, muttering, "Did she change the lock?" And the sentence hung in the air like a cold gust of wind. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He knocked loudly, then louder, shouting, "Mom? Mom, are you inside?" But only silence replied. He tried calling my phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic started to ripple through him, subtle at first, then faster when Melissa's eyes caught something on the floor near the door, a white envelope with his name written in my handwriting. He picked it up with trembling fingers, swallowing hard as he opened it, and inside he found a single sheet of paper, the first blow of truth. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, direct, and devastating. "Daniel, the house is not yours. Yesterday's documents are invalid without my secondary consent, protected by your father's legal clause. I have taken the day to think. We will talk later. Do not enter the house. Mom. Daniel's face drained of color. His breath grew shallow. He stared at the letter as if it were written in fire. What does she mean? Invalid? He whispered, disbelief shaking in his voice. Melissa snatched the paper from his hand, reading it with wide eyes that flickered between confusion and anger before she snapped, "This can't be real. Are you sure your father didn't tell you anything?" Daniel shook his head helplessly. He never said a word. Melissa's frustration quickly turned into fear, because the renovations, the plans, the sense of control she believed she had, all of it collapsed within seconds. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, pacing back and forth, mumbling, "No, no, no, this can't be happening. She signed the papers. I saw her sign." Melissa's voice rose sharply, "But if there's another legal condition, then your signature means nothing. Daniel, this house isn't yours." The words hit him harder than he expected. He sank onto the front step, staring blankly at the locked door, the same door he had walked through his entire life without hesitation. He knocked again, softer this time, almost pleading, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Inside the house, everything remained silent, untouched, still holding my presence even though I was gone. The morning sun climbed slowly across the sky, but for Daniel and Melissa, the world had darkened. They were locked out, not just of the house, but of the power they believed they had gained. And as they sat there in shock, clutching the letter that shattered their illusions, neither of them knew that this was only the beginning. The real truth, the real consequences, the real storm, had not even arrived yet. 6. The truth revealed. One long paragraph as requested. While Daniel and Melissa sat outside the locked house, confused, angry, and terrified of what the letter meant, I had already reached the tiny cafe near the park, a quiet place where my husband and I used to come for tea on Sunday mornings. I chose the corner seat, opened my bag, and placed the folder of legal documents on the table, reviewing every page again, not because I doubted the truth, but because I wanted to feel the strength of every clause, every signature, every line my husband had written to protect me. After a few deep breaths, I called the family lawyer, the same man who had helped my husband prepare the conditions years ago, and when he answered, his voice warm with familiarity, I finally felt the ground beneath my feet steady. He reminded me gently that I still held primary ownership, that the law recognized me as the sole decision-maker, that nothing Daniel signed could overpower the clause requiring my second consent, and that I had every right to choose what would happen next. As he spoke, I felt tears slip down my cheeks, not of pain this time, but of relief, of strength, of justice long overdue. When I left the cafe and returned home hours later, Daniel was still sitting on the doorstep, his eyes red, his hair messy from running his hands through it over and over. Melissa stood nearby, pacing like a trapped animal, frustration radiating off her in waves. The moment they saw me, they jumped to their feet. "Mom! Finally! Where were you?" Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly, and for the first time in a long while, I looked at him not as a boy I had raised but as a man who had forgotten who raised him. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked past them, unlocked the door calmly, and stepped inside. They followed me quickly, their voices filled with desperation. "Mom, what is this? What does the letter mean? You signed the house over." Daniel insisted, his voice trembling between fear and denial. I placed my bag on the table, turned to face them, and with a steady voice that surprised even me, I said, "I signed the papers because I trusted you. But trust doesn't mean I gave you power over my life. Your father knew the world better than I did. He protected me in ways I never realized." Melissa's eyes narrowed, her facade of sweetness cracking. "What exactly does that mean?" she demanded. I lifted the folder, opened it, and placed the first document in front of them, the legal clause stating that after my husband's death, the house could only be transferred if I approved again, verbally and in writing, after the first signature. "This," I said calmly, "means the house is still mine. You cannot renovate it. You cannot claim it. You cannot move me. You cannot pressure me. You cannot take anything unless I agree. And I don't agree." The silence that followed was so thick it almost hummed. Daniel stared at the document as if it were a foreign language, his lips parting but no words emerging. The reality of his situation sank into him slowly, painfully. Melissa, however, wasn't humble enough to stay quiet. She jabbed a finger at the paper, her voice rising. This is manipulation. He didn't tell us. You can't expect us to believe this. I looked at her steadily. Your disbelief doesn't change the truth. Daniel finally found his voice, but it was soft, broken. Mom, why didn't Dad tell me? The question cut through the room like a blade. I breathed in slowly and replied, because he trusted you to be a good man. Because he believed you would never treat me as a burden. Because he assumed you would respect the home he built with his own hands. Daniel's face crumpled, his chest rising and falling as guilt poured into him like cold water. Mom. I didn't mean. I thought. He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. His silence was the confession. Melissa crossed her arms tightly. So what now? You're going to punish us? Throw us out? Make us beg for access? She snapped. I shook my head. No. I don't need revenge. But I will not let anyone, not even my own son, turn me into a guest in my own home. The shadows in the room grew longer as the sun set behind us, casting the three of us into a quiet, emotional standoff. Daniel sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands, whispering, I messed up. I messed up so badly. Melissa looked away, frustration burning in her eyes, already realizing that the power she believed she had was slipping from her grasp. And I stood there, holding my husband's letter close to my heart, finally understanding what strength truly meant, not shouting, not fighting, not breaking, but standing firm in the truth. This was not the end. This was the beginning of everything shifting. And for the first time in days, I felt fully awake, fully alive, and fully in control of my destiny and my home. The confession. One long paragraph as requested. The house felt unbearably heavy that evening, every wall holding its breath as Daniel sat hunched on the edge of the sofa, staring at the floor, while Melissa paced back and forth like a storm struggling to contain itself. I stood beside the dining table, watching both of them with a mixture of sadness and steel in my chest. After minutes of suffocating silence, Daniel finally lifted his head, eyes red and tired, and said in a quiet, broken voice, Mom, I need to tell you the truth. Melissa froze mid-step, turning sharply toward him. Daniel, don't, she snapped, but he raised his hand weakly to stop her, his shoulders slumping as if he no longer had the strength to lie. No, Melissa, he whispered, it's over. She deserves to know. My heart tightened as I stepped closer, unsure what storm was coming, but ready to face whatever truth he had buried. Daniel swallowed hard, running his hand across his face before speaking again. Mom, we didn't want the house for renovations. Melissa's jaw tightened. Daniel. She hissed, but he ignored her completely. We needed the house because we are in debt, he continued, his voice trembling with shame, huge debt, more than you could imagine. My breath caught, a cold wave rushing over me. Debt? What debt? I asked softly, not accusing, just trying to understand. Daniel looked at me as if it hurt to speak. Investment scams, loans, things we shouldn't have trusted, and then Melissa lost her job 3 months ago. We were drowning. We didn't know what to do. Melissa's eyes flamed with anger as she spun toward him. Why are you telling her this? She doesn't need to know everything. Daniel shook his head with a sadness that softened even my hurt heart. She does. I lied to her. I betrayed her. She deserves the whole truth. I felt the room tilt slightly as the confession settled in my bones. This wasn't just greed, it was desperation, fear, and weakness mixed together. So, you wanted the house to sell it? I whispered, barely able to speak. Daniel's silence was the answer. He didn't nod. He didn't look up. He just sat there, breathing heavily, as guilt wrapped around him like chains. Melissa folded her arms, lips pressed tight. We wouldn't have thrown you out, she said sharply, but her tone carried no softness, no comfort, just annoyance at being exposed. I looked at her, really looked at her, noticing for the first time the coldness in her eyes, the entitlement, the frustration of a person who believed she deserved more than life gave her. But you told me I was a guest, I reminded her quietly. She rolled her eyes. People say things in the moment. You're making it dramatic. Daniel turned to her with disbelief. Melissa, please stop. It's not helping. The first crack appeared on Melissa's perfect mask. Oh, now I'm the villain? Really? She shot back. I've been the one trying to fix everything while you fall apart. Their voices rose, trembling with anger and fear. I stepped between them, not to fight, but to stop the world from breaking further. Enough, I said softly, but firmly. They both fell silent. You should have come to me, I told Daniel, my voice heavy with emotion. I would have helped you. You didn't need to steal from me, or try to control me, or make me feel like a burden. Tears spilled from Daniel's eyes as he shook his head. I was ashamed, Mom. I didn't want to come begging for money like a failure. I thought if the house was in my name, I could fix everything without involving you. I didn't want you to worry. His voice cracked, and suddenly he looked like a boy again, the same boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and trembling lips. I kneeled in front of him, lifting his chin gently. You are my son, I said, tears gathering in my eyes. You don't need permission to ask for help. You don't need to hide from me. You only needed to be honest. Melissa scoffed loudly. Well, honesty doesn't pay off debt, does it? Daniel turned toward her sharply. Melissa, please. She crossed her arms. No, Daniel. We came here to get a solution, not to cry over feelings. We still need the house. The audacity of her words cut through the room like lightning. Daniel stared at her, stunned. Melissa, stop. This is my mother's home. Her life. Her memory with my father. But Melissa didn't flinch, instead she stepped closer, lowering her voice. Daniel, be smart. Without this house, we have nothing. Think about our future. That was the moment something shifted inside Daniel. His eyes widened slightly, as if he finally saw a stranger standing in front of him. He stood slowly, looking at Melissa as though seeing her for the first time. Our future, he repeated softly, or yours. Melissa's face reddened. What is that supposed to mean? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already spilling into the space between them, heavy and undeniable. And as Daniel took a step back from her, I felt a painful but necessary certainty bloom inside me. This confession, this moment, this fracture between them, was only the beginning. Life was about to change, for all of us. The breaking point. One long paragraph as requested. The silence after Daniel's question, our future, or yours? Hung in the air like a rope tightening around the room, pulling every breath out of all three of us. Melissa's face hardened, her eyes narrowing into slits of disbelief and insult as she stepped forward with a sharpness that felt almost dangerous. Oh, so now I'm the problem? She snapped, voice dripping with venom. I've been carrying this marriage, Daniel. I've been dealing with the stress, the debt, the panic, while you fall apart and now suddenly your mother walks in and you find your backbone? Daniel didn't shout back, he didn't defend himself. Instead, he stared at her with a kind of exhausted clarity, as though her tantrum was finally exposing the truth he had been too blind, or too afraid, to see. I watched quietly, my heart torn between sympathy for my son and realization of how deeply Melissa's influence had twisted him. She wasn't just angry, she felt threatened. Losing control of the house meant losing control of the one golden ticket she had counted on to save herself. She ran a hand through her hair, pacing like a caged animal, muttering, Unbelievable, unbelievable, all this time, all this pressure, and now you're turning on me because she locked a door? Her voice cracked, revealing something darker beneath the frustration, fear that her plans were unraveling. Daniel took a slow breath, rubbing his temples. Melissa, it's not about the door. It's about what we did. What I did. We lied. We manipulated. We tried to force Mom out of her own home. Melissa spun toward him. You mean I tried? Daniel looked at her softly, painfully. Yes. The word sliced the air like a blade. Melissa's face flushed with a rage that made her eyes glisten. So that's it? You're blaming me? After everything I've done for you? Daniel swallowed hard. Melissa, debt or no debt, nothing justifies treating my mother the way we did. I felt tears forming in my eyes, not because I wanted him to hurt, but because for the first time he was truly seeing what had happened, not through excuses or desperation, but through honesty. But Melissa wasn't ready to lose control. She stormed closer, pointing at me with shaking fingers. She manipulated you. Don't you see? She's playing the victim. She probably planned this from the start, pretending to be helpless so she could trap us. I stepped back, stunned by the cruelty of her accusation. Daniel's face went pale with disgust. How dare you, he whispered, stepping between us. Don't talk to my mother like that. Don't talk about her like that. Melissa blinked, shocked by his sudden firmness. Daniel? He didn't stop. No. Enough. This is my fault. I let you push me. I let you talk me into making decisions that weren't right. But I won't let you insult her. It was the first time he fully protected me in months, and the moment hit harder than I expected. Melissa, realizing she was losing him, tried a different tactic. Her voice softened instantly, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. Baby. I'm sorry. I didn't mean, but Daniel shook his head. No. Not this time. Tears aren't going to fix this. Melissa's fake softness evaporated instantly, replaced with sharp bitterness. So what now? She demanded. You choose her over me? Your mother over your wife? Daniel looked at her with an exhaustion so deep it seemed to weigh down his entire body. I'm choosing what's right. Melissa let out a hollow laugh, stepping back dramatically. Wow. Amazing. So that's it. Your mother wins. I shook my head gently. This isn't a competition, Melissa. It never was. Melissa glared at me, hatred flashing in her eyes. Of course it is. Everything is a competition. And congratulations, you won. You finally turned him against me. I felt a chill run through me, not from fear but from realization. Melissa wasn't just selfish, she was dangerous in her desperation. Daniel spoke softly but firmly. Mom didn't turn me against you. You did that yourself. The room trembled with the weight of the truth. Melissa looked around, breath shaking, her world collapsing piece by piece as she realized the house, the control, the leverage, the power, everything she had fought for, was slipping through her fingers. She grabbed her bag with trembling hands, her voice low and cold. Fine. If you want her, keep her. But don't come begging to me when you're drowning again. She stormed toward the door, slamming it so hard the walls shook. Daniel didn't follow her. He didn't call her name. He just stood there, shoulders sinking, face falling into his hands as he whispered, Mom. I'm so sorry. And in that moment, watching my son break, watching the truth finally surface, I knew we had reached the breaking point. But sometimes, breaking was the only way to rebuild. 9. The next morning. One long paragraph as requested. The next morning arrived with a heavy, eerie stillness, the kind that wraps around a home after a storm has passed but leaves behind the feeling that something is still unsettled beneath the silence. I opened my eyes slowly, my mind replaying the chaos of the previous night, Melissa storming out, Daniel collapsing into apologies, the truth spilling everywhere like broken glass. The house, once a place filled with warmth and memories, now felt like a battlefield after war, quiet but charged with the echoes of everything that had been said. I walked into the kitchen, started preparing tea, my hands steady yet my heart trembling with a strange mixture of sorrow, strength, and something like hope. As the kettle whistled, I glanced toward the living room and saw Daniel sitting on the sofa, the same place he had been last night, his head bowed, elbows resting on his knees, his clothes still wrinkled and slept in, if he had slept at all. His eyes lifted slowly when he heard me, and in them, I saw guilt so deep it almost hurt to look at. Mom. I didn't know where else to go, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. I nodded gently, handing him a cup of tea, watching his hands shake slightly as he took it. This is your home, I reminded him softly, and the simple sentence hit him with more force than any lecture could. He swallowed hard, tears gathering in his eyes. I don't deserve your kindness, he whispered, staring into the cup. Not after everything. Not after what I said. What I let happen. I sat down across from him, my voice steady. You made mistakes. You trusted the wrong person. You let fear guide you. But realizing your mistakes is the first step to fixing them. Daniel wiped his face roughly. Mom, I don't even know where to start. Melissa is gone. Our debt is a mountain. My job barely pays enough. I ruined our relationship. I hurt you. I've lost everything. His voice cracked on the last word, and something inside me softened, not out of pity, but out of the love that had never truly left me, even when he hurt me the most. You haven't lost everything, I said quietly. You still have me. And you still have a chance to change. He shook his head, frustration and regret mixing in his eyes. But how? I can't drag you into my problems again. I can't risk you. I can't let you carry my pain. I leaned back, taking a slow breath. Daniel, carrying you is not a burden. It never was. What hurt me was not your debt, it was your silence, your dishonesty, and the way you allowed someone else to speak to me as if I was nothing. He nodded, shame washing over him. I know, and I hate myself for letting it happen. He set the cup aside and covered his face again. Mom, I loved Melissa. I believed her. I followed her. I thought she wanted the best for us. But last night I saw something I didn't want to see. I reached out, touching his shoulder gently. Sometimes love blinds us. Sometimes we give our heart to the wrong hands. What matters is that you've opened your eyes now. Daniel let out a shaky breath. I feel so lost. You're not lost, I said softly. You're wounded. But wounds heal. For the first time since morning, he looked up at me, not as a defeated man, but as a son seeking direction. What do I do now? He asked, almost like a child. I stood, walked toward the counter, and returned with a single envelope, the same one containing the lawyer's card, the same one that held the truth he had ignored for too long. You face your reality, I said gently, placing it in his hands. You talk to the lawyer. You fix your debts honestly. You rebuild your life step by step. And you learn to stand again, not leaning on me, not leaning on Melissa, but standing as a man your father would be proud of. His breath caught when I mentioned his father, and another wave of tears slid down his cheeks. Dad would be so disappointed in me, he whispered. I shook my head, sitting beside him. No. Your father believed that a man's strength is not measured by how perfectly he walks, but how bravely he rises after he falls. And you're rising now. Daniel leaned into me, his forehead resting on my shoulder, breaking down completely, a release of months of pressure, fear, guilt, and confusion. I held him quietly, stroking his hair the way I used to when he was small. The sun slowly spilled into the room, filling the house with soft, golden light, as if trying to heal everything that had grown dark inside these walls. After a long moment, Daniel finally whispered, Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. I smiled through tears. I never will. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something return to this home, something fragile but powerful, hope. The storm was not over, but the rebuilding had begun. The final decision. One long paragraph as requested, emotional and cinematic. The following week unfolded like a slow sunrise, still dim, still uncertain, but each day a little brighter than the last, as Daniel and I quietly rebuilt what had been broken between us, not through big speeches or dramatic gestures, but through small, consistent moments of truth. He helped me cook breakfast again, he accompanied me on walks. He sat with me in the evenings and talked about the mistakes he had made and the man he wanted to become, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a gentleness in him that had been buried under fear and manipulation. But even as things softened between us, the shadow of Melissa still lingered over the house like a distant thundercloud, somewhere out there, angry, plotting, refusing to accept that the house was never hers. And sure enough, on the 7th morning after she had stormed out, there was a loud, sharp knock at the door, the kind that doesn't ask permission but demands it. I opened the door slowly, and there she stood, pale and furious, her eyes burning with a mix of desperation and entitlement. Behind her, a taxi idled with the trunk open, as if she expected to walk inside, take what she wanted, and leave triumphantly. I'm here for my things, she said coldly, pushing past me without waiting for an answer. Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, freezing when he saw her. Melissa, you should have called, he said quietly, but she just scoffed, tossing her hair back. Why? So you could ignore me again? She began storming through the living room, grabbing her makeup bag, her scarves, her charger, every movement sharp, angry, loud. The house felt like it was shrinking around her energy. Daniel followed her slowly. Take what you need, he said calmly, but don't speak to my mother the way you did before. Melissa laughed bitterly. Oh, so that's your new personality? The obedient son? Daniel didn't react to the insult. Instead, he spoke with a steadiness that surprised even me. I'm not choosing sides. I'm choosing what's right. Melissa's eyes flashed as she slammed her bag shut. What's right? Daniel, you're drowning in debt. You're losing everything. And you think what's right is going to save you. Daniel's voice softened, but it didn't break. Doing the wrong thing already cost me enough. Her jaw tightened. And what about us? Our marriage? The question hung in the air, trembling. Daniel swallowed hard, then spoke with a quiet sadness that felt final. Our marriage ended the moment you tried to turn me against my own mother. Melissa stared at him, shocked, furious, but deep down knowing it was true. So that's it? You're kicking me out? She spat. Daniel shook his head. No. You left. You chose to leave. Melissa stood frozen for a moment, breathing hard as if she expected him to suddenly change his mind, to beg her to stay, to hand her the house keys, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer to me, standing by my side, something he hadn't done in months, and that single gesture shattered whatever hope she still clung to. This house, Daniel said firmly, belongs to my mother. And I will protect it. I will protect her. Melissa looked at him with a face twisted by betrayal and disbelief. You'll regret this, she whispered. Daniel didn't answer. I didn't either. She turned sharply, carrying her bag to the door, and for a moment she paused, maybe expecting someone to stop her, maybe waiting for a dramatic reconciliation, but none came. She stepped outside, the door closing behind her with a thud that echoed through the house like a final chapter shutting. Daniel stood still for a long moment, then exhaled deeply, his shoulders loosening as if 100-pound weight had slipped off his back. He turned to me, not as a defeated child, not as a guilty man, but as a son who had finally reclaimed himself. Mom, he whispered, I want to start over. Not just with you, but with my life. I want to fix everything. Tears blurred my vision, but I smiled. You already started, I said softly, taking his hands. Over the next days, Daniel met with the lawyer, arranged repayment plans, consulted a financial advisor, and slowly began untangling the mess he and Melissa had created. It would take time. It would take sacrifice. But he was finally walking forward, on his own feet, with his own strength. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting warm orange light across the dining table, Daniel placed a small envelope in front of me. What's this? I asked. It's the official notice, he replied gently, canceling the transfer request. I'm formally withdrawing any claim to the house. It's yours. It will always be yours. My eyes filled with tears. Not because I needed the paper, my husband's clause had already protected me, but because Daniel chose to honor me himself. Thank you, I whispered, my voice trembling. He smiled softly. No, Mom. Thank you. For letting me come home. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The house was never just walls and rooms, it was the place where love could break, bend, fall apart, and still find its way back. And as Daniel hugged me, tightly, sincerely, with the warmth of the boy I raised and the strength of the man he was becoming, I knew we had not just ended a painful chapter. We had begun a new story, one built not on signatures or ownership, but on the one thing the world could never take from us, family.